Welcome to the Community Wellbeing meeting. Do we have any apologies, please? I guess we have apologies for lateness for two councillors. Oh, they probably haven't, no. No, so there are no apologies. Could I have someone move the apologies, please? Thank you, Richard. Seconder, Ben. All in favour? Carried. Are there any conflicts of interest? There are no conflicts of interest. So item 1, we have Active Southland, their annual report to the 30th of June 2023. And I'll welcome along Vanessa, Jess and Gemma. Thank you for coming along today to go over your report with us. So we're ready when you are.
Hello. Okay, it works. Kia ora everyone, ko Jess Domigan, toka wingua. Just wanted to acknowledge Rex, Susan and Keith for welcoming us all and for you all having this time for us to come and speak. Also wanted to acknowledge the events of last week and send our support and I guess acknowledge the work that the councillors and the council staff all did last week. So. Without further ado, we put the report to you each 6 months through Gemma O'Neill, and just felt like with the change of CE for us and a new council here, it was a good opportunity to come and meet with you, talk a little bit broader about what Active Southland does in the Eastern region, and also talk about what some opportunities might be for partnerships. So I'll hand over to you.
Ngā mihi nui ki a koutou, Vanessa Huey-Pole, Chief Executive of Active Southland, and thank you again for the opportunity to speak. So very briefly, because we know we're time limited, we wanted to walk you through a little bit about the journey of Active Southland. So whoever has the clicker, if they could click onto the next slide, please.
Didn't work before, so I'm not.
There it is. Perfect. Thank you. So just very, very brief overview is Active Southland was established in 1990 as the Southland Sports Foundation, not long after it was renamed as Sport Southland, which is a bit of a misnomer because over the journey of its life, the organisation has had work and focus across not just sport but also physical activity in its broadest sense, including health and wellbeing outcomes. So this journey of who we are came to fruition not so long ago in 2021 when we rebranded as Active Southland, which more closely encompasses and reflects the work that we actually have done for a number of years. It's fair to say that innovation has run through the veins of the organisation over the years, with many pilots being undertaken in the Southern region on behalf of national entities such as Sport New Zealand. So, and that includes a number of pilots that are being run at the moment, which Gemma and Jess will speak to a little bit more closely. But the national entities such as Sport New Zealand have found favour with piloting and trialling out various opportunities to learn and bring things to life down in Southland, which I think speaks to adaptability and flexibility in learning as we go. Thank you. The organisation firmly and deeply believes in its purpose, and that is encompassed around individual and community wellbeing. So we We have a really deep belief of the role that physical activity plays and the value proposition that it holds, not just to community members but to collective bodies. We think about groups of people, we think about schools, we think about workplaces, and we think about bodies that like to connect and group together. That also includes councils as well. So we believe that the value proposition, both socially, culturally and economically, has a very, very strong value proposition, and we want to talk through some of the evidence of that today. The next slide just shows you what we mean by physical activity, and we use the frame Te Taha Tinana, which comes from a framework from Mason Jury, which talks about we are holistic beings. We represent physical space as well as cultural and social and family and whānau. And so physical activity to us doesn't mean just playing sport, although that is an important component of it. We are talking about how we get ourselves to work, how we get ourselves to spaces. It's about how we engage and how we develop as young people into thriving adults. It's also about how we live and learn and how we work and how we play. So just by definition, when we talk about physical activity, we mean it in its broadest sense. Thank you, and I'll pass back over to Jess.
Thanks, Vanessa. As Vanessa touched on, we believe play, active rec and sport is a cost-effective investment towards your local government wellbeing outcomes, and I know these are familiar to you, but we're just going to talk through what we, Active Southland's doing in each of these wellbeing spaces already that you part of it you fund through the role that GMIT has. So, I'm doing that. So that's all right. Social and cultural wellbeing. Evidence relating to the impact of play, active rec and sport on social wellbeings is quite considered and can be across three kind of broad themes that we identify. So strengthening social networks. We all know that physical activity can bring people together and provide connections. Bringing communities together, increasing a sense of belonging, improving pride, and it can actually help reduce antisocial behaviours in communities. Cultural wellbeing, we see that there's ties from participation in play, active rec and sport with strengthened cultural ties, increased wellbeing from participating in culturally relevant physical activity as people have aspirations for what they want to do in a culturally appropriate way. So I'll hand over to Gemma.
Good afternoon, everybody. I know a few faces around the room, but I'm Gemma O'Neill and I'm based here at our office in Gore. One of our first major pieces of work we have going on at Eastern is through our Healthy Active Learning team. So we've got 2 staff plus their wider team based here in Gore, servicing servicing 66 schools across Southland and 20 in the Goran districts. They work, it's a collaborative contract between Sport NZ, Ministry of Ed and Te Whatu Ora alongside us, and it's about improving the wellbeing of children and young people through healthy eating, drinking and quality physical activity. One of their 6 outcomes, we've just got a picture up there of a local group of tamariki who made the hikoi up East Peak not too long ago, and it was around the outcome of strengthening connection with the wider communities. So students from St Mary's, Matota Primary and East Gore made the trip up there. As you can see, it was a beautiful day. And they were learning about the historical and cultural background and the stories around how the Hokanui Hills were formed through the story about Matamata. And it's just an example of those schools that are engaged in our program that are coming together to learn something locally, as well as the activity of physically trooping their way up that hill for anyone that's been up there as well. So that's a really cool outcome. Those kids are learning and also putting it into practice. East Gore students particularly went back to school and did their own interpretation of the story as well, as they'd understood it from the day. Some really cool outcomes that team's doing locally. Our iconic Moonshine Trail event will be back again in 2024, which we're really looking forward to. I've just been told it was 15 years this coming year, I think, so that's really exciting, with only the one missed due to COVID. For 2023, we had 502 participants across 7 events that we're up to now, which is really amazing. We've got opportunities from 2 kilometres in length through to 50. So there's literally something for everybody on foot or on bike. 29% of those were first timers. The oldest participant was 90, and believe it or not, he does the 15-kilometre run, of which he runs most of it too. So, and our youngest was 2. 6 corporate teams. We had 90 people in our new 2-kilometre family event. So based in the new part of the water race trail that's incorporated inside Dollamore Park, we've done a 2-kilometre event, and that's around encouraging not only our locals to pop out to the park on the day, but also if mum or dad are off doing a longer event and the other half of the family sitting around at Dollamore, they can come along and join in on something while they're there. So reflected in the fact that 66 of those 90 signed up to do that on the day. Overall, we had a 9 out of 10 experience rating for the event for 2023, so we're really happy with that, and we're looking forward to being back in February 10, 2024. Community insights is really important to us as an organisation. Making sure what we do and how we do it is based off what our community members want and need is really important to us. The picture we've got there was just of a recent event we held at Tulloch Park. So I've been lucky enough to be involved through Keith in the Tulloch Park redevelopment process to date. And so we started thinking about how we could incorporate community voice into what was happening down there alongside the community, Matoda Community Board members and all the other players that have been in the committee for that project. I spent some time talking to local stakeholders down in Matoda and found that actually the project and what we wanted to listen to and take on board from the community became bigger than just Tulloch Park, and so we focused it more on what exactly was happening in Matoda, what was happening now, what people enjoyed, what people else were looking for, and what they thought they could be better with the themes that we worked with. We went, visited the schools, we went, spent some time at the bunker, and we had our afternoon down here at Tulloch Park, which was really cool. Councillor Phillips was there with us, had some pizza. We are currently just working our way through our data and evaluation of that at the moment, but the intent is that when that's all come together, it will be a shareable document to relevant stakeholders, so we'll make sure that that gets back here to advise things that are happening that could be relevant to the community, to the council for the Matoda community as well. A neighbourhood play system project in each score. So this was one of the pilots that Vanessa was referring to. So East Score was one of 4 original sites for the neighbourhood play system from Sport NZ, and as far as I'm aware, it was one of the only ones that's made it as far through the process as it's gotten so far. So the background for a neighbourhood play system project was around understanding how various urban systems impact children play experiences and support development of recommendations towards ensuring play-friendly environments. So for East Gore, it was based around East Gore Primary School, which is one of our healthy active learning schools, and the wonderful principal there, Wendy Kitto. She has been a major driver and has really proven to us that having the right people with the right passion involved in projects like this is a huge benefit to something like this. We also had the council involved in this. Keith and his team have been heavily involved, and it was community-led by the tamariki. They went around, they literally took photos of the things in their community and talked about why they were good, why they weren't, and what else they would like to see. As a result of all the hard work that was put in down there, there was a list of recommendations and projects planned out, phased out, and to date there's been an amazing amount of work based off community voice that's actually occurred in the Hamilton Street and Oxford Street playgrounds. If anyone's been down there and noticed the new equipment that's in place, the new amenities that are in place, and there's obviously more to come as funding becomes available to us. We truly hope that this becomes an ongoing and sustainable community project that is led by community themselves, and the ties that it's got in with the community members that are on the organising group for it. We went to Wellington in May, to Recreation Aotearoa's Green Pav conference, and Keith was there, and Wendy and myself, and Wendy presented on the project. to an amazing amount of people that came along, chose to listen to this story. But I always laugh that her main takeaway from her presentation was you've got to get yourself a Keith. Again, if you haven't got the right people involved in these kind of projects, then they just don't go anywhere. So having the right group of people has made a huge difference for East Gore and where that's gotten so far and where it's going to next.
So the third wellbeing that we wanted to focus on is obviously the economic wellbeing and where play, active rec and sport can make a difference. So Sport New Zealand suggests that the economic value generated for local communities and businesses through play, active rec and sport is quite significant. If you saw on the Moonshine Trail, we capture where people are coming from, and a lot of the people are coming from out of town. Employment of New Zealanders into the play, active recreation and sport sector is another significant direct contribution. Harder and harder, as you'll know, to support that workforce, especially in lifeguards and similar kind of roles, and managing them through a career pathway. Productivity gains as a result of physical activity, savings for communities as a result of the volunteer workforce, and the economic impact of major events, which we've touched on.
We're very lucky to administer Sport NZ's Tūmanoa Active Aotearoa Fund via Active Southland, and for us over the last year that looked like just over $87,000 across 15 organisations in East and Southland benefited from that fund. So Tūmanoa is based around funding for programs and projects delivering play, active recreation and sport experiences for tamariki and rangatahi, especially those that are less active, people with disabilities, women and girls, or in high deprivation areas. It looks to ensure that we're helping young people to be active in ways that they want and in ways that meet their own needs. The one I've got up there noted as a notable story is that it's really interesting to see what the different impacts and outcomes and how they vary across these projects, and some of them are, I suppose, sort of left of field, and the example being the girls' yoga group that was set up via consultation with the youth workers at the Community Networking Trust. And one of the major impacts I've heard via stories from the staff, it's still an ongoing project, is that one of the young girls fell asleep in a yoga class, and that was like a super highlight for her youth worker as a student that relatively high-strung is probably the words to use, and this young girl, after weeks of learning yoga and getting involved, feeling confident in her surroundings and with her peers, fell asleep. And that's the kind of, you never know what the important impacts might be for an individual, so that's quite a cool story from there. Next one. Supporting volunteers, obviously a huge part of active rec and sport across communities is the volunteer network that we have. As you can see, for New Zealand, over 1 million adults have participated in volunteering or supported a group in the last 12 months, which is a pretty impressive number. For us recently in the area, we hosted a session from the New Zealand Amateur Sports Association. We held it at the Gore Multisports Centre. It was a project partnered with SDC and GDC to bring them down and talk our local groups through the changes that are coming in the Incorporated Societies Act and the timeframes that they've got to work through those. There was a bit of people were a bit worried about it, so it was quite good for them to have a chance to sit down, hear about it, talk through it, their concerns, and ask their questions. We even had groups travel from Otago to come to our one here in Gore. So we had over 10 groups represented that day. We also took some feedback from those groups that day and looking for information on where they would like further support. And I think it's intended that further support will be coming out in time to support those groups and those kind of volunteers through this process. Obviously, it's quite daunting when you're a volunteer and not a specialist in this area, so quite important to be able to support those guys where we can. And our Toko Oranga program locally, a project we have between ourselves, Gore Medical and Gore Health. It's helping with appointments to help people with becoming more active, better eating and decreasing their stress. And locally we've had 537 new appointments to support people through that. It's important locally for increasing things like productivity, and by increasing people's physical activity, we're helping increase their health outcomes, their quality of life, and decreasing sickness and absenteeism. And these appointments are completely free to our registered members at those two medical centres.
And the last one I'll touch on, and I'm conscious that we're taking your time, thank you for this, is the environmental wellbeing. So provision of green spaces for play, sport, active rec, and the infrastructure for active transportation can support the achievement of environmental and community wellbeing outcomes, specifically creation of pro-environmental attitudes and behaviours, more environmentally friendly urban environments, reduced emissions from active transport, and obviously improved wellbeing from being active in your natural environment. The example that we currently work really closely with GDC on as part of the Spaces and Places program. I think it's going to be on your agenda a wee bit later as well, but broadly this is a strategy as a result of a collaboration between ourselves, Sport New Zealand, ICC, yourselves, Southland District, and then our community funders. And it was born out of a willingness by councils and funders to work together to create and implement a more aligned approach to the regional planning of spaces and places. Some of those realities you'll see there, but otherwise I might just hand over to you, Vi.
And just to go up on the last slide, just back it up one, Jess, is just to note that sitting alongside this strategy is an active advisory committee made up of all councils and community funders as well as Active Southland to essentially connect and understand valuable data and insights for effective, robust decision making. It's not designed to replace or supersede any sort of autonomous agency that every organisation such as yourself has. But what it is designed to do is provide you with really robust data and insights with which you can be informed to make your decision. And noting that this potentially is in your agenda later on, you know, we have aspirations, and our aspiration is that frameworks such as this have viable relevancy in your processes, that frameworks like this coupled with advisory committees that are working with this type of data are used to inform your management plans, your master plans, your reviews when they happen, and the intent is to support you towards robust decision making. So our aspiration is that eventually that there would be an endorsement from council to actively work alongside and have this frameworks front of mind where relevant in and across your various plans. And thank you very much. Talking about aspirations, I think the couple of key things I want to pull off this slide before I wrap up is that we have opportunity to leverage and to bring to your community learnings that we're seeing not only within our wider region but within our country as well. So we're part of a collective of regional sports trusts which are actively working in this space. So we're learning all the time about things like active transport. We're currently working with a couple of other partners and developing these active transport plans, and how they look in each community is quite different. But we work alongside non-government organisations, community groups as well as councils to look at relevant plans that might help in this space, not only from a climate action perspective but also about that physical wellbeing space and utilising physical activity and movement for those wider benefits. Also just acknowledging the value of green space and open spaces, and not only to be there but how we might support councils to actively utilise these spaces in partnership with community organisations. So again, we're prototyping, we're piloting a whole lot of opportunities not only within Gore District but the wider region as well. And so just indicating we have aspirations to support you in this space depending on where you head to with your long-term plans and your goals. So just to wrap up, I just want to say a massive thank you to you as council for our continued investment, not just for the investment but the partnership and collaboration that has happened alongside the investment, and so you need one alongside the other. And so we say thank you for that, and we make a promise that for the investment that will follow and that we're advocating for, that we'll bring everything that we have as an organisation to leverage that dollar that you provide us with We have various teams in our organisation that range from events through to our teams that operate in primary and secondary school, our teams that operate amongst NGOs and charitable trusts and incorporated societies, that we bring their learnings and their arms and legs where we can to leverage outcomes in terms of Gore District and to support the outcomes and aspirations of your community. So again, we thank you and pass it back over to you. But thank you very much.
Thank you for that presentation. That was very informative. Are there any questions? Councillor Paul McPhail.
Through the chair. Just asking, the population in Gore's ageing a lot. I just want to know whether you have anything to do with the other end of the scale. You've got a lot of kids organisation. Is there anything else you deal with for the older people? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely, and acknowledging absolutely that population trends, we're staying on top of those as much as we can, and just looking at, obviously waiting for census data to come out, but I think we know what they're going to say is that the population continues to age and that we need to be mindful and thoughtful about how we provide for every single age group in our population. So we have initiatives that currently cater for age groups, whether they be younger and or older, and Green Prescription is a perfect example. Tuku Oranga is another great example of that. And we're currently working alongside the likes of regional sporting organisations and clubs to look at how are our provisions and our offerings relevant to the populations and communities where they find themselves. So we are one organisation, but we actually work in and alongside a whole bunch of other organisations that we're actively advocating and encouraging the use of data, such as the one that you raised, to challenge and advocate for our population as we see it changing.
Thank you. Councillor Richard McPhail.
Yeah, sorry, I know we're running against time, but yeah, great report, probably a statement and one question. Great to see praise for Keith and his score, particularly around all the tamarikis running around trying to work out what the best gear is and that sort of thing. Question is there enough over there? Like, is there what we have there? I'm probably going against what the other councillor said, for the youth that are in East Gore. So we've got Oxford Street and then we've got Hamilton Park across the main road. Did they express or did they state that there was sufficient there? The other thing is, did they point out any other areas, kids point out any other areas that they play and that we don't know about? And the other thing is obviously taking cognizance that we've got Matai Ridge that's coming online, and hopefully we're going to have some lovely families moving in there with more kids. So yeah, I think it's a really great initiative that you're doing some work over there.
Fantastic.
But yeah, any response to that?
Yep. Gemma.
Thanks, Lisa. Yes, the kids so far have been exceedingly happy with what's gone down so far, haven't they, Keith? So, but as I mentioned in the project, haven't included the entire report in with this, but they were phased aspects of what else was to come. So things like adding to the amenities so that there were toilet and changing facilities, making more those spaces that are there and have been improved to this point, just that little bit further so that families can come along and enjoy them across age groups. We've taken into consideration things like seating of different heights so that a person who's got a little bit more difficulty with getting down and getting back up again has an appropriate option compared to a kid who can jump over top of any seat. So we've definitely taken on board the voice of the tamariki. They were the core group from the start of that project, but it has become wider than that. It's now what we would call an intergenerational project, so it takes into aspects everything. Yes, the kids went to lots of places further than those playgrounds. We had information around what they do down at the river, how they access getting across the main road. For example, kids having to go all the way down under the bridge to come back around to cross to the other side. But interestingly, when you mentioned about Hamilton Park there, the tamariki very rarely referenced Hamilton Park from that aspect that they can't safely get across there. So the conversations that have been happening around those crossings and stuff happening on the road there will be really important for ensuring that those spaces that are there and have the facilities in them, the kids can actually access, let alone mum, dad, grandma and everybody else. So, yeah.
Okay. Councillor Reid.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for your presentation, very good. I do have a couple of questions and I'll try and squish them together. Given the fact that traditional sports have dropped off, there's got to be a way forward for other sports, and I'm thinking more, how do you encourage the kids that are left school and have never really engaged in physical sports other than keeping their thumbs busy? And it worries me that because sports are organised through schools, along with organisations like yourselves, that there is that lapse at the other end in the middle, and then you've actually got sedentary adults before you know where you are. So just interested in what you see going forward with that.
Yep, so we haven't cracked this, but it is our whole focus in terms of how do we actually understand the changing needs and wants of our young people. In sport, while there is decreasing participation, it is important to acknowledge that it still forms a really important part of our community, and that pockets of our community still live and breathe our sport. So it's not one or the other, it's both. But I think people also vote with their hands and their wallets, and so the more that we can ready the sports sector to provide offerings that are different and that meet the needs of our community, the better off we will be as a whole. We are currently working with non-traditional sport providers. When I say that, I mean things like alternative education, non-government organisations, and young people who may not walk in traditional methods of education and or your mainstream sort of methods of engaging with community. They are equally as important. So we're working with non-traditional providers to look at offerings that are that may be more interested and more relevant to young people wanting to engage, and then leading into more active lifestyles leading forward from that. So a tricky, complex sort of space, but we are continuously evolving and trying to evaluate our impact in this particular area.
Thank you. Because also those sporting activities, whatever they be, involve a social connection as well, which
Correct.
is really important.
Correct.
So thank you for your work.
Thank you very much.
Any further questions? Councillor Phillips.
Mine's not a question. Mine is just a congratulations to Active Southland for their service to our council. I believe we're getting an A+ service for the money that we're getting,
Thank you very much.
passing out, and keep up the good work, guys. You're doing a good job.
Appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Any further questions? Your Worship.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a question. We talked a little bit about partnership. We've talked a little bit about a decline in sports. We've just been gifted a lovely tennis court plus club rooms that I guess we're starting to discuss. Just be interested to see what a partnership there might look like moving forward. I'm sure our staff will have some fantastic ideas, but it might be a space for us to both work in.
Absolutely. I think, look, there's complexities in all of that, and the complexities of holding assets and managing assets is tricky enough in itself. But the types of things that we would explore include, current participation of those sports. What is the participation of that, and what is the likelihood of that particular sport actually growing in that particular community? And that might dictate then how much investment the council might like to put forward into the future. And so a large part of this is framed within the Regional Spaces and Places strategy about what good looks like and how do you use a framework like that for decision making. So I really encourage you to have a look at that and think about how you might utilise a framework like that, but equally so in collaboration with the likes of our Spaces and Places Advisory Committee, even just to talk through what good could look like. I know currently we've been supporting clubs who have momentum and appetite to work together. And I'll use an example about Winton as just an example where we have a group of around 13 clubs who have an interest in working together. So we're currently bringing them together to help facilitate what does this look like. And so within the strategy you'll see frameworks like concepts like multi-use and hubbing or networked facilities, which basically reflect the limited amount of resources that we all have, and so therefore the resources that we have need to be utilised to its maximum so that we can ensure that we care for the things that we have, but we also ensure that the things that we have are relevant and meet the needs of our community, not just a small pocket of our community, but the largest part of our communities as well. So those are just some of the initial things and frameworks that come to mind when we consider an example like that.
Any further questions? Well, thank you very much for your presentation, Vanessa, Gemma and Jess. Thank you for all the good work and mahi that Active Southland does for the Gore District to keep our community healthy and active. Appreciate your presentation. Thank you.
Kia ora.
Now on to item 2, which is on page 18, proposed Southland Community Foundation. Just wondering, Rex, do you have anything to add to the notes?
Just take the report as read, and as I say in the report, it's really just an initial presentation provided by the consultant wanting to socialise that with you as a council. And be aware that this is going to be a work in progress over the next, I'd suggest 2 to 5 years in creating some sort of foundation for it to advance. You'll notice in one of the slides that Southland is one of a few regions that doesn't have a foundation, and there is a real momentum being gained for this to be advanced. And I think it's just something that Council has an awareness of. And obviously, once it gets established, we'll become a good partner to be involved with.
Any questions for Rex? Councillor Fraser.
Through you, Madam Chair. Rex, the reason we probably haven't got it is because our community trust was so buoyant. It's probably one of the most successful community trusts in the country that has continued on. My only fear is it's just another funding organisation looking for money from the same pool. That's the only thing. I know we can't in Gore attract ILT or ILT Foundation money, but it's just that's my only fear.
I think it's from generous gifting from the community, not another fund setting up. Thank you. Councillor Reid.
Sorry, I was just about to make the point that it was also, from my point, benefactors of the community who would set up that trust, and that money would be gifted or left via donations or... Am I right or wrong?
That's how I understand it. Councillor Phillips.
Thank you, Madam Chair. A prime example would be the Balclutha one with the funding they just put into the new community, into their centre. It was quite an established amount.
Any further questions or comments? Would someone like to move that the report be received? Thank you, Councillor Reid. Councillor Paul McPhail seconded. All in favour? Carried. Councillor Reid.
I'm not quite sure whether we move the Active Southland report be received.
Should we move that? It was just, we didn't, do we need to move that? Yeah.
Yes.
Would someone, thank you for that. Would someone move that? Thank you, Councillor Reid. Seconded, Councillor Phillips. To move on to item 3, which is page 32, the Gore District Community Compass Quarterly Report for 2023. Is there anything further you'd like to add to that, Rex?
Not really, Madam Chair. I just reinforce that this is a good touch point for us as a council. to get an understanding. It's a subscription, I think, Sonia, that we have had involvement with for a few years now, and one of the things that we think is important is that it gets brought to your attention for, like I say, that touch sense point, but also it's now a public document and the community have access to that information as much as you as a council, so it's a good starting point for some of those conversations.
Any questions, please? Yes, you wish.
More a procedural one, and this might not be the right forum for it, but is this not duplicating a lot of the information that we get from Infometrics?
Can you respond to that?
Infometrics is generally one-off projects that Great South have commissioned for their strategy work, as I understand it. I know that we have, in some instances, engaged Infometrics, but we haven't during or as part of this process, I don't think.
If I may be assistance through the chair, no, we don't use Infometrics that much. As Rick said, we use it for one-off projects mainly through Great South, but this actually replaces the information. It's instead of.
Thank you.
Councillor Reid, and
Thank
then
you,
Councillor Phillips.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I really like the data. It's right across the board and it's quite detailed. Surprisingly, and one of the things that jumped out and smacked me in the face was the increase of crime in Waikaka.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, that came across a bit flip, but you know, a rural community at quite a distance from police and fire, you know, interesting statistic.
It's interesting too that deprivation index didn't show Waikaka as being low, so yeah, that was an interesting point. Any further questions? I think this is very interesting information that could feed into our LTP, that we need to keep it in mind, just in the background. So could I have someone move that the report be received? Thank you, Councillor Fraser. Councillor Reid. All in favour? All in favour? So move to item 4, page 44. Update on regional recreation strategies, the Southland Sports Field strategy and Murahiku Southland Spaces and Places strategy. And you'll note the attachment that went with that. Anything further to add to that?
Through you, Madam Chair, these are the two reports that Vanessa was referring to from Active Southland in terms of the Spaces and Places Advisory Group that is in existence, which we have representation of from both myself and Keith. And Keith was also a key player in the sports field strategy development work. I think it's a good example of that partnership that we actively participate as equal partners in those working groups at that staff level. A couple of things I would add. It is also worthwhile for us, Matara Licensing Trust have representative on the Spaces and Places working group as well, and it's also, so that's good from a local relationship and local partnership perspective to actually start to cross the wires that are on the plate for the MLT as much as it is for the council. And then also look at it from that regional perspective of what that advisory group does. I mean, both of the strategies are attached, the Spaces and Places strategy and the Sports Field strategy. What I am interested in, I suppose, is how we utilise these going forward. So one of the things that I'm working with Keith on is obviously as part of our active sport or active recreation activity management plans, what, if anything, out of these, and there's some recommendations which I have highlighted in the cover report that are there on page 45 and just before the recommendation to receive the report in italics, that I've tried to pull out some of those specific recommendations out of the strategies that we are now considering at a staff level as to what that might mean for our program of work, if anything. And one of the things that we will probably come back to the full council with is if there's anything that needs consideration for work to be undertaken as a result of being recommended in these regional strategies for you to consider as a council, it'll come through that activity management planning process and the resource required as part of the long-term plan. So that's the first point. I would just signal, and interested in in any conversation around that today, but just putting it on the radar that will come back to you as a full council as part of our long-term planning process. The second thing is you will, and I was sitting in the conversation at one of your previous meetings, it might have been council, I think it was council, where you were talking about the taking over of the asset/liability of a community pavilion type thing on our reserves. This is the sort of work that starts to inform some of that, and while you were talking about incorporating it into your reserve management plan conversations and the working group associated with that, there's also the opportunity to, I think, as part of our renegotiations with Active Southland, and some of you alluded to it today, that we start some conversations with Active Southland around getting some of that external support to facilitate some of those conversations as well. So those are just some initial points I would like to flag, and interested in your feedback and comments around any of this work at a regional level, but how it impacts with us locally.
Thank you, Rex. Are there any questions, comments, feedback? Councillor Reid.
Sorry, just a question for Rex, further to what you were just saying about the Preston Street courts. What happens if the two sports concerned don't? That's something that we need to look forward with as well, that if that falls over with those two groups, what sport can we use that space for?
Agree, and that would be part of the process of the discussions that we would need to be looking at either future proofing or understanding what and how that might be able to be utilised going forward.
Any further? Councillor Richard McPhail.
Yeah, just through to Rex. Just confirming, so the strategies that are there that we're feeding into, the work that we're hearing from the other projects that are going on may help you with your work. Is that what we're saying? So that we're not crossing over, we're not doubling up, we're not... Okay, that's fine. I just wanted to... I took it that's what you were saying.
Yep. Well, one of the things that I'm quite unusual, as you would probably expect, blunt or direct about when dealing with these advisory groups is, you know, strategy is only effective if it's in language that is able to be utilised and implemented and worked through and aligned with. The last thing we want are these strategies that sit because they are too far removed from the local, where the action happens. So that's one of the things that both Keith and I have constantly referred back to in these conversations. And the other thing that I am very conscious of, having been in this game for a bit too long, is that consultants who you bring in to do these reports generally will provide recommendations that potentially have about another 10 jobs for them that can come out of it. And that's one thing that we've been quite clever on, or when I say clever, we've been quite clear on in terms of making sure that, again, we are not just going to go down that path. And that's why I'm talking about us introducing this into our activity management plan so that we can be directly involved and understand what that might mean from a resource perspective.
Interesting. Okay, Councillor McKenzie.
You were trying to remember my name, weren't you? Just the comment on Hamilton Park. For overflow for football, possibly. In the back of my mind, there's something telling me that they tried to play football over there and the ground was a bit too Humpty Bumpty. That's just, for some reason, that's in the back of my mind. But if it's just for an overflow, is it suitable? Would it be suitable for an overflow for football?
I would just, answering your question, currently it's probably too wet to be a great soccer field or football field. It's a work in progress, and a lot of the site was also a former landfill, so it was material that's quite close to the surface that will be brought up of trying to drain it or do anything with it. So.
Thank you, Keith. Councillor Phillips.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Is this probably just a question for Rex then? Are you looking possibly then to have a workshop on this? Have you got a specific date or just to carry on from the other workshop?
Yeah, I think what we'll attempt to do, Councillor Phillips, is introduce it as when we start to talk about the activity management plans. And if there's anything in greater detail that comes out of that, we can workshop that. But I'm happy to take advice and direction in terms of if there's some things offline that we specifically want to focus on, then we can factor in a particular workshop. I think we've also got to tie it into our reserve management plan working group stuff as well, and just start to align all of these things that are spinning and the plates that are spinning and bring them down together.
Any further comments or questions, Your Worship?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I guess to follow on from that conversation that's been circling around my head of this reserve management plan group, while everything fits in this, it seems to be getting away from its original purpose. So I can see Keith's kind of wanting to stay a bit focused on that. So I wonder whether it's the same membership or whatever the case may be, a different structure we could look into of that same group, so that we're all dealing with the same base of knowledge, but keeping it separate to the reserve management plan. I don't know what that looks like, but maybe something to have a think about.
Councillor Phillips.
Yeah, I see we've got a scheduled meeting on Thursday, so we could probably have a bit of a discussion about that anyway, on how the structure is going.
Any further comments? I just feel that with the changing face of sport and our climate, that we need to make sport viable and sustainable as well. So I think that this strategy will help to do that. Would someone like to recommend that the report be received and that the Council note the Southern Sports Field Strategy July 2023 and the Southern Spaces and Places Strategy 2023? Someone like to move that? Councillor Richard McPhail. Seconded, Your Worship. All those in favour? Carried. We'll just move on now to item 5, page 48, Ready for Living, and the Age-Friendly Strategy 2023 to 27. Anne or Kylie, do you have anything to add to the report?
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. Kylie's just going to give you the summary document in an A3 because you've got it, it's the last page in your agenda and it'll just be a little bit easier for you to read. I'm sure most of you will realise that Ready for Living started its journey about 5 years ago, and it was very much a collective of community people and some agencies that had strong vision that Gore had an ageing population, and at that point Gore had the largest older population in the country. Now we're third on the list. Waitaki and Central Otago have more older people, or people older over 65 than we do. Picking up on Rex's comment about strategies, those of you who know me, I'm a person that might do strategies, but I actually want to implement them. And I think we've tried very hard to put this in our community's language. So this started in November last year, where I facilitated 5 workshops, and I do want to acknowledge Kylie for her work in this document, because there has been a lot of work going behind the scenes, and also Rebecca McRae. But part of the thing that we really wanted to do was to ask our older community to come and have conversations with us. And so we made sure we had smaller groups, and we started those by basically saying to them that, you know, would they spend a couple of hours with us and tell us about their journey in life and what has been tough, hard or indifferent, and what should we be thinking about that we need to do differently for those that are coming next. And actually that proved to be very successful. We talked first off to our community, and then we ran workshops with the agencies that provide services to our older people, and we tested the information we had with our agencies, and they actually added some more value around, in a bit more detail, I guess would be the way to put it. So from that, we have this document. I guess what we're seeing across New Zealand now, when we first had the first work plan, and Kylie came to the Gore District Council 2 years ago, yeah, so this is year 3 of her being here. And for some of you might not realise that Gore Council doesn't fund her salary, it's funded through PH Vickery Trust. And we approached them last year, and they agreed to fund to the 30th of June next year. So we have that funding confirmed. And then to implement projects that were on that original project plan, we've sourced other bits and pieces of funding, or we've partnered with organisations that have been keen to work with us to get things across the line. But there's probably about 5 or 6 other councils now in New Zealand that have done age-friendly strategies, and people are starting to realise that this is not just a Gore District, this is a global and national and local issue around ageing, and it's needing an environment to think about things differently of what we will need in the future when we're making decisions. There's 8 key areas that most of those strategies and are recognised internationally, which are those things on page 47 of your agenda: the outdoor spaces and buildings, transportation and mobility, housing, social participation, respect and social inclusion, and civic participation and employment, and then community support and our health services, which we've talked quite a bit about today, and communication and information. So if we can get all of those things right or improved, and we improve the social inclusion and we reduce isolation. And Kylie often says to me in her work that she hears of people that are quite isolated, or we constantly heard in our conversations about people that are lonely. And I guess one of the challenges is trying to connect with those people and find ways to improve that situation in our community. And the spin-off, if we aren't doing those things well, is we see cognitive decline and depression and other health issues. So if we get it right, we have far better mental health within our community. And it's really important that our older people maintain their independence and their autonomy, and that they're well respected. And there is such a shift now to have people staying in their homes longer, instead of, if you looked back 10 years, the move was to put more people into serviced living, like rest homes, etc. So with that, we have to make sure that we've got the right services that can actually support people to stay in their homes. So on this document that you've got, these little circles of housing, employment, volunteerism, health and wellbeing, communication, information, recreation, mobility, accessibility and safety. Those were the key priorities that our community said they wanted us to work on. And then the bullet points alongside those are very quick snapshot of what's in the document, just to make it easy for people to get an understanding about what we're going to focus on. I think at that point, maybe I'll just leave it open for questions. If you've got any questions after reading the strategy that you'd like to ask myself or Kylie. And the main purpose, I guess, today is we want to get you to sign off the strategy so that we can start working on it. But we also want to alert you that we want to have a conversation through the long-term plan process with a view to fund one full-time equivalent to maintain and further develop this work.
Are there any questions? Yes.
Through you, Madam Chair. Just after an interesting article and stuff a couple of months ago about boomers like myself who are getting into the retirement age, who have been renting all their lives, and the affordability to stay, say, in a place like Gore, who are leaving. Do we have any sort of numbers on how many that is, who are looking elsewhere to live because we're not been able to provide the basics of housing for them? Or not us as, but the community hasn't been able to?
I think we don't actually have any hard data, but in the conversations there was a lot of information of the challenges people were having around housing, and one of those was about competing with young people. So now we've got young people in the same market looking for no gardens, maybe 2 bedrooms, and that was elevating the price. And there was a lot of older people said that they couldn't afford to downsize from their big family homes. There wasn't the type of living that they would like in Gore, so there's no intergenerational spaces. There's limited rental as well. So there is a piece of housing work that we need to do, trying to look at all of those aspects. The other thing we do know about Gore is that people have left Gore for Central Otago, for example, but then we're seeing people coming back from Central Otago and maybe moving into rest homes or into smaller properties here because they've got family here. So the answer is we haven't got any hard data, but there's been a lot of conversations with people to understand what the challenges are.
Councillor Reid.
Oh, sorry, no, you go.
Sorry.
Finished?
Councillor Fraser, did you have another question?
So going forward, if we've got this coming into our long-term plan, we will be needing to get data to actually push forward from that, would we not?
So the thing we're going to be asking in the long-term plan is about having the staff person to work on this, because without the people resource, we can't actually do any of the work. So there will be a piece around housing, and we expect that we'll build up a scope about what that work will look like, and then we would have to find some funding to do that piece of work.
Councillor Reid.
Thank you, Madam Chair. A couple of things there. It's interesting that times have changed, and as you say, and they're encouraging some of us older people to stay in our own homes, but of course that also precludes a lot of people from buying another family home. So it's a bit of a vicious circle. And the other thing too is that locally, and I know specifically there's a lot of women on their own who have to rent. It's actually becoming very, very expensive, and they're caught between the devil and the deep blue sea trying to find somewhere where they can live after paying rent. And the only way forward, I think, for the district is maybe for the Ready for Living group and whoever that may entail at the time, working with government to have some sort of housing for elderly people, perhaps connected to other housing, so that there's some sort of social interaction as well with that. But yeah, I'd really like to see us push for that. I think that's one of the main drivers in our community that causes a lot of worry for our senior citizens.
Councillor Paul McPhail.
Sorry, through the chair. I'm a bit of a dollars and cents person, and maybe might not be the right forum, but I'd like to know the funding, what funding we're looking at, that we need down the track, and what you're looking for, so that we can get a bit of an idea. So
So, Councillor McPhail, that'll be the next piece of work once this is signed off, and we will be coming back in the LTP with some figures for you. Yeah.
Okay, Councillor Richard McPhail.
Thank you for that, and yeah, I totally support the Ready for Living project, and it's great to see that the seeds that have been planted are starting to come out the other side. So yeah, look, I've got great support for that, and it's actually getting quite, how do you say it, concise. We're actually starting to identify from a huge playing field down to some really, really good stuff, and I think it's great. Looking at it here today. So yeah, total support, great presentation, and totally behind this, happy with it. Probably what other Councillor McPhail said would be around making sure we have the funding, like what it's going to cost us when we go to long-term plan, and just confirming we are over with the Vickery Trust. There's nothing we can go back there, pinching the pennies that we could have another crack, is there?
And we have a great relationship with the PH Vickery Trust. We did apply for 3 years funding and they gave us one. We're not totally sure why that is, but it could be that we were embarking on the strategy process and now we have like clear information about the strategy. So I do intend to go back and talk to them. They at that time they were looking for bigger projects, so they may be a partner in the housing space. Who knows? But we haven't forgotten them. We talk to them regularly. Kylie gives some very good reports. So my intention is that I will go to Christchurch and we'll present the strategy to them and have a conversation. Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks for that.
Councillor Mackenzie.
Anne, a question for you. I look on our senior citizens that I am 1 year off becoming one of. There's a massive resource of knowledge and skills there with their senior citizens. I'll give you an example. The guy that lives next door to me is an English person, and he was one of the main people that designed the windows for Concord. He held, there's people around that have got these skills that I'm sure they would like to share, whether they be tradespeople or things like that. Do we look for those kind of folk that could participate and probably enjoy being part of that community?
So to answer that question, when we had discussions about volunteerism, it was really interesting because it was probably a three-way mix of people who said, no, I've done my time, I don't want to volunteer, I've been involved in every club you can imagine all of my life and now this is my time. And then there was people that said that it was incredibly difficult to volunteer and get involved. And then there was others that said it's really simple. And often those people were people that had had a whole life in Gore District and are well connected. And other pieces of work that we're doing in our team with workforce volunteerism and exactly what you're talking about has come up of utilising expertise and seeing how they could work with businesses or other community organisations. So actually right now we're having a bit of a conversation with a volunteers organisation to see what we could do to connect people in that space. So I think, yes, we do need to utilise those expertise.
Thank you.
Any further comments, questions? Well, thank you very much for the report, Kylie and Anne. Oh, sorry, we have?
Sorry, it's me
Sorry.
again.
Councillor Reid.
I just want to acknowledge the hard work by Anne and also by Kylie. It's really, as Richard said, it's been a long time in the planning. Well, not that long, but long enough in the planning. But the fact that I think we've communicated with so many different people across so many different spaces just bodes well for where we're heading with it. So thank you both.
Yes, thank you, Anne and Kylie, for the work that you've done across this, with 26% of our population going to be over 65 in 2033, I think it's very important that we're age friendly, and I support and thank you for the work that you're doing. Just finishing, could I have a recommendation that the report be received and that the funding be considered as part of the Council's LTP effective from the 1st of July 2024? Someone move that. Councillor Fraser, seconder. Councillor Phillips, all in favour? Carried. Thank you, councillors, and I'll call the meeting to a close at 6:15.